Now with us this morning to review the newspapers are the broadcasters and journalists Thomas Copeland and Vidisha Memata. Great to have you both with us. Thanks so much for joining us, and Merry Christmas. I think we can still say that. Thomas, you picked out the newspaper that really caught my eye this morning, the front page of the Eye, just more rail misery for so many people going into the new year by the sounds of things.
That's right. If you weren't impacted by the train strikes before Christmas, it looks like you might be caught up this side of Christmas. A new strategy from the rail unions. Basically, what they're going to do is poll different groups of workers separately, and that means they can all strike on different days, and that's a way to sort of maximise the length and the disruption caused by the strikes, which is ultimately the point of the strikes. What you see kind of is a ripple effect. We've been seeing that already, even when days when strikes haven't been happening before Christmas. On the other days when the strikes are meant to be off, you see reduced services because the operators know that people are really wary. They probably aren't going to be using the services as much. They probably know they can get away with putting on fewer services as well. And this sort of speaks to a bigger problem from the rail workers at the moment, as distinct from the nurses and the doctors. I think we're going to be talking about in just a second, is that the pandemic has kind of changed the way that our transport habits work. People have more options now. When the rail strikes were announced, people could say, well, I'll work from home from certain days. I was travelling through London, noticed the extent to which I thought the streets were quieter. I spoke to some folks who were telling me that people had just decided to work from home on those days. Some people even deciding to travel back earlier to family homes for Christmas. That really blunts the effects of the rail strikes or the rail unions, and that's going to be a challenge. They've decided now, by the looks of things as reported in the Eye, they're going to double down, try to increase the length of these strikes, polling different days, extending that disruption. It remains to be seen, I think, whether that will be an effective strategy. Public opinion, as far as I've been able to see, hasn't turned against rail strikers as much as I had predicted that it might by this stage. People seem to be broadly on board, but I wonder how much of that is down to the fact that people do have different options. They're able to maintain their support for the strikes, from home, because they're able to do that. We'll see the other side of Christmas whether public opinion will start to turn.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Thomas. Certainly it does make a big difference for people, doesn't it, that they can work from home now more easily. Vidisha, just leading on from what Thomas was saying at the front page of the Mirror, I mean, we've had nurses, ambulance workers, midwives striking, and now it could be that junior doctors may look to carry out industrial action too.
That's a possibility for the future. This actually hinges upon a very interesting and deep-seated survey that the BMA have done, which is to look into how junior doctors, newly qualified doctors in the early stages of their career are feeling. So yes, strikes are a possibility that's being floated for the future, but in fact, the much more salient current point is a sense of discontent that they feel. Well, around 2/3 and 3/4 of doctors who were polled in their early stages of their career said that they felt hugely under pressure for all the reasons that we know have been brewing in the last few years, being massively overworked, hugely underpaid, and of course for young junior doctors, the cost of living crisis is beginning to bite. So a separate survey showed that even in a fantastic job that they're so proud of, these junior medics are having to think about choosing between heating and eating or borrowing money from friends and family, because they are in exactly the same housing and cost of living situation as everybody else. And a huge proportion of them have said in the surveys that they have already Googled or searched for alternative jobs. And this is such a shock, because we know that if you work in medicine, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or anything else, you're led there by a sense of vocation, of really wanting to do the work. You routinely take on extra shifts. You care about your patients often more than you care even about yourself. And so for doctors with that level of dedication to say that despite multiple years of medical school, they just can't take the strain that's been put on the system, it's really something.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, as you say, it may not even get to industrial action, because the worrying thing from that survey is that 2/3 of junior doctors are supposedly already looking to change sectors and just get another job. It's, very worrying indeed. The front page of the Times, Thomas, you pulled out as well. There's cabinet row over the Prevent Counter-Extremism programme.
Yeah, there's meant to be a long-awaited overhaul of the government's anti-extremism programme. It's called PREVENT. It's been delayed now by a row between the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and Community Secretary, Michael Gove. Essentially, it all comes down to presentation rather than content. Michael Gove wants to see as little as possible redacted. The Home Office goes through a typical redaction process, we're told in the Times. They're removing the names and organisations that are accused of encouraging, of stimulating Islamic extremism in the country. The Home Office redacts those. Michael Gove wants to see that redaction kept to a minimum, we're told in the Times, largely because of his own long-standing views on this stuff, like the Trojan horse scandal. We had quite strident views on. He wants, and the quote that's given from him and his people is the most accurate picture of Islamic extremism in Britain to be given to the public and to be given through the report. There are other people, quoted again, anonymous sources in the Times, who say that they largely support this position from Gove, which is that the Home Office is too cautious about potential legal threats, and that these names of individuals and organisations, they can hide behind the fact that the Home Office is scared, basically, of being sued by them, libel, by organisations who can take that to the Home Office. I'm inclined to think there's a little bit more going on here than is currently meeting the eye. There's a brilliant quote from an anonymous source given to the Times that says, quote, "There are lots of people who have lots of things to say. There are lots of views," which is about as sort of vague and unhelpful as an anonymous quote can possibly be. We'll see when the report is published, depending on how much black ink there is, who came out on top.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. It's really, really interesting, isn't it? The Guardian front page is also quite interesting today, Vidisha. You've clocked that as well. It seems that, 3 years after Brexit, charities and farmers are still wrestling with the reality of what that means.
Yes, this is like the hangover that never ends. In fact, The Guardian have been doing a long series of investigations on Brexit with the uplit Sunland. So they've spoken to farmers, they've spoken to medium-sized enterprises, and now it's the turn of charities. Where are UK-based charities at following the decision to move out of the EU? And unfortunately, the situation isn't good at all. The idea was that after leaving the EU, the UK government would sort of replicate those funding streams, and so there wouldn't be any damage to the third sector. And yet the consortium of charities in Wales says it's at nearly, I was going to say 70 million, but it's much, much more than that. It's nearly 800 million. I dropped off a zero, which would probably cause a huge amount of relief to the government if I said that. And Scotland also have said that they're approaching similar levels of shortfall. So years after the poll, years after the decision, charities which do so much work of picking up the slack in terms of social care and social needs, of meeting all the government's manifestos, stepping in, often through caseworking, through donations, through the workers themselves going above and beyond. They're saying they're still waiting for the government to step in and put in place those forms of legislation which were meant to replicate EU forms of funding. They're still waiting for it. The article ends with a sort of hanging note, because of course we don't know what's going to happen. The government's Rishi Sunak is an arch Brexiteer only in the sense of formal financials. He's in favour of a sort of unregulated market. He wants to turn the UK into kind of Dubai Airport or Singapore, somewhere like that. I don't think he has thought very much about the knock-on effect on charities and the third sector.
Yeah, certainly the teething problems continue. The front page of The Sun, there's a real mix of stories around today. Thomas, this one's quite interesting, isn't it? More than 1 million robberies and thefts have just been unsolved in the space of a year by police.
That's right. New figures from the Home Office. More than 1 million burglary and theft dropped by the police, 3,000 a day. And the reason for all of them is essentially the police don't have a suspect. The other headline figure included as part of this story, as part of the data that came from the Home Office, is that the charge rate, so the proportion of crimes which result in an arrest and then a suspect being charged, has dropped to a record low, 5.4%, down from 15% 7 years ago. So, I mean, the articles is included also in the front of the Telegraph today various explanations in Duncan Smith, for example, saying that the police are spending too much time doing work that is meant to be for the social services. Rishi Sunak, of course, during his leadership campaign, talked about cracking down on what he called woke policing. Labour Party saying the government don't really have a plan, they're just talking about stuff like woke policing. There's a kind of interesting, at the heart of this is a question of confidence and of confidence of people in the police forces. Martin Hewitt, who's the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, has promised that police will visit the homes of those people who have been burgled in a bid to increase public confidence.
Thomas, we'll have to leave it there.
Surprising only to me in the idea that how could the police ever...
Thomas, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We will pick up again with you both the next hour, and certainly I want to get to the front page of the Star that Badisha pulled out for a bit of light relief, but we'll bring you more on all our top stories, including that shocking stabbing from Birmingham at the top of the hour.